Good morning, Lois. This is Lois Robbins, and today is February the 17th, 2010. She's been a mover and shaker in the township for a number of years, and so we're going to interview her this morning. Lois, is there anything you would like to say before we get going?
Just that I love this town.
Well, good. She moved here from Sylvan Lake, Michigan, and just prior to that time, she was employed at the University of Detroit as a teacher. What were you teaching when you were there, and how long were you there?
I taught religious studies.
Okay.
And I was there for a few years, not very long.
Okay. And this was, you originally, you became a teacher at one of our local...
No, actually I did my graduate work in Chicago at Mundelein College.
Oh, okay. And then you taught somewhere other than here in Detroit?
I only taught in the Detroit area, although I did give workshops for a number of years all around the country, based on a book that I had published.
And what was the name of that book?
That was Waking Up in the Age of Creativity.
Oh, that sounds interesting. Do we have a copy of it in our local library?
I don't think so.
Well, we should certainly, if there are any available, we should get one in there, I would think.
Well, I'll be happy to donate one.
Okay. So then you left that. About what year did you retire from teaching?
I knew you were going to ask. I don't know. It must have been around around 85 or 90.
Okay. And at that time you were living in Sylvan Lake.
Yes.
Then at some point you must have thought, gee, I'd like to get out of the big city here and move into the country, and you picked Brandon Township. Was there some particular reason that you picked the township?
Well, I didn't have to have an attached garage to live in Brandon Township as I would have in some other townships.
Oh,
so it was a financial reason for me.
Okay. And so you then moved out here, and you live on the east side of the township now?
Yes, near Baldwin Road on Sherwood Road.
Okay, so you're up near Goodrich, Goodrich.
Oxford.
No, Oakwood.
Oh, well, I'm a little south of there.
Oh, okay. Because I do happen to have a number of pictures of Oakwood before the cyclone went through.
It blew away.
And it's amazing. Oakwood at that time it had 2 hotels, and it was considered to be a little larger than Ortonville.
Yes.
But that's a discussion for another time. So then you moved out here, and you wanted to get into the society, etc., and you were retired at that time of Ortonville. What did you do in order to do that?
Well, I realized that I wanted to do environmental volunteerism. and that in order to be effective at that, I'd have to deal with local government. And for people in local government to pay any attention to you, you have to live in that township.
That's right.
So I began to attend planning commission meetings and township board meetings at that time.
You know, what made you pick, or what was your desire to get involved in the environmental aspect?
That's been with me for quite a long time, and I was heavily influenced in graduate school by a gentleman that nobody's heard of. His name is Thomas Berry, but he called himself a geologian. He was a Passionist priest who died last year.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a very unique and different way of thinking about theology. It had to do with honoring the environment. And he made one statement when I was in graduate school that really blew me away. At that time, we were all worried about the bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, look, the environmental bomb has already gone off.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wasn't aware at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And now I am. And these things are very important to me.
You did graduate work. You wanted to get your master's?
Yes.
Is that it? Mm-hmm. Where did you get your master's in?
At in religious studies.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what school was that?
That was Mundelein College.
That's
in Chicago.
In Chicago, Illinois. And you lived in Chicago for some time?
For 1 year while I did my graduate work.
Okay, very good. And so realizing that you did want to do something that might affect the thinking of the township and the people here,
Mm-hmm.
How did you attended these meetings, and then
Mm-hmm.
what happened?
Well, as I was sitting in one of those meetings, there was a developer who came before the board or the planning commission, I forget which, who wanted to develop an area next to Kearsley Creek.
Hmm.
And somebody in the audience said something that I hadn't been aware of. He said, well, Kearsley Creek is a designated trout stream.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized we had a tremendous treasure here in this township.
Mm-hmm.
And so I began to think that it would be pretty important to educate local people about that very important resource that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the impetus for my founding the annual event called Creek Fest.
Very good.
And for 2 years, I did everything for Creek Fest.
Oh.
I was it.
And it's become a regular.
And it's become a regular thing, yes.
We do it every May, is it? Or
It's in June, early June.
Every June,
Mhm.
right. And we do it right here in the future when you're looking at the mill. You'll see the creek running by here, or the Kearsley Creek. And this is what she's referring to. And I would imagine that you'll still be going to Creek Fest in years to come.
Right, I'm still on the committee.
Okay, and so now, what is number one? Did the builder ever?
No,
He never went ahead.
he
with it?
was refused.
Mm-hmm. So then you became very interested in this, and did you form a committee, or what? Who was it that took
Well,
over?
in the beginning, I really did everything myself
Mhm.
for Creek Fest. The first 2 years, and it darn near killed me because it was a lot of work. So I was delighted when I went to the Downtown Development Authority, and they said that they would like to take it over as their event. So that was the beginning then of the committee that has carried it forward to today.
And what actually happens at this event?
It focuses on the creek. We have displays and exhibits down near the creek with different organizations that are concerned with the water quality in the creek. The creek is not only a designated trout stream, one of only 2 in Oakland County, but it's also the headwaters to the Flint River. So another outcome of all of that is that I've become quite active in the Flint River Watershed Coalition.
Now, what is that? What does that consist of? That
consists of people that are very concerned about the Flint River and its tributaries. Other things that happen at Creek Fest is it's just a really fun family day. There are a lot of great activities for kids. There's the minnow race, which is the thing that the kids always love the most. And we have a yacht race on the creek. The kids make little tiny boats, and they sail these on the creek. And whichever one gets under the bridge first wins.
I see. Don't they have a rubber ducky type of thing?
It is like a rubber ducky thing, only it's using these little wooden boats instead.
And I know you have I believe it's the county that has the chap in that tells us about the birds and the animals.
Yes, he comes from another county. He's not from our area, and I forget where it is he's from, but we've had him almost every year. Joe, I'm forgetting his last name, but Rogers, I think. And he does a wonderful show with birds of prey that he cares for and has trained.
Very, very interesting.
Yes.
And he also always attracts a large crowd of so they come back year after year. Go ahead.
That's right. This year we're adding another thing, which is amphibians. A gentleman will bring in his amphibians and talk about those. And then we have a poetry contest that's associated with Creek Fest. A wonderful new addition last year was the pet parade. That's a lot of fun. People bring their pets. And
are you also going to have a blacksmith show or shop?
I think so. I think there's going to be something like that. I read
something about that. And we hope this year to start building a replica of a blacksmith shop that was actually on our.
Yes.
And so that should be interesting.
I've heard about that. Been talking about that for a few years.
And now I hope it's like many things, we talk about it and plan, and then it takes off. Okay, so then you did this. I know you're also interested in the flora fauna.
Right, and that really grew out of my interest in the creek. Because for a water body to be healthy and for the water to be clean, it's really important that vegetation be allowed to grow up next to the creek. Most people like to mow right down to the creek's edge, and I understand why they want to be able to see the water. But there are ways to do that where you can still see the water, but have a lot of vegetation be, right next to the creek. And the best way of doing that is by using native plants. Native plants are geniuses at filtering evil things out of water.
You had, I noticed along the creek here, you have a flower garden along that, and that's all native plants that you have in there?
Yes.
What type of things are there?
Well, there are 2 or 3 different types because there are different types of soil and sun conditions. Some of them are water-loving plants. I think there's a blue lobelia down there and some red cardinal flower. There is black-eyed Susan. I think there's some Culver's root in there. These plants have very deep roots, and so they also help to keep the soil in place and prevent erosion. Mm-hmm. They don't need to be watered except for the first year while they're sinking their roots deeply, because they can find water on their own.
And then out of this garden, I believe, grew the idea that there was a vacant lot next to the township hall.
Yes.
And what happened there?
Well, we installed another native landscape there with a grant from the Oakland Native Partnership Initiative and the Oakland County Farm Bureau. Mm-hmm. So that went in, I think this will be the 4th year for that one.
So actually it's in its 2nd or 3rd year now? Or is it
this is the
longer?
4th year.
This is the 4th year.
I
believe. By the way, the reason I have my jacket on, we're sitting in a room here that on this fine February day has probably reached about 50 degrees. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so what kind of plants do you have over there? I noticed they seem to be taller than...
They are tall, and it has caused some controversy in town because there are some people who think they look like weeds, and they don't like it. They would like to have it gone. And we've done our best to educate people about why we're doing this. This summer we plan to cut everything back early on with the hope that they will not grow as tall as they have in years past.
Now they call it, that's Lois's weed garden?
No.
No, I think that's very fine, and the fact that you put down pavers and you have a bench in there and a couple of benches. It's a place people can sit, and I noticed probably people that are with the village or the township sometimes eat their lunch there. That's very good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And those benches were donated by the Woodworking Club. Thank you very much.
I think we have some down here also.
Yes.
So your big plan then for this year is to expand that or to go beyond that?
We're right in the process of hoping to get approval from the village council for a fountain which would go in there. It would be a very modest little bird bath type of thing with the water just dripping over the sides. And the reason for that is that when we wrote the grant for the garden, we said that we would seek designation as a wildlife habitat for that garden. Mm-hmm. So that's part of what was in the grant. Okay. And in order to qualify as a wildlife habitat, you must have a water feature. Mm. There are 4 things that are needed for wildlife habitat. Food for wildlife, places to raise young or nesting opportunities, mm-hmm. cover, and water. We have all 3 except the 4th one we don't have yet, which is the water.
Didn't they used to have a water fountain next to the police station?
There was a big one there. Mm-hmm. I think it's still there, isn't it?
I'm not sure. It seems to me they were
on the
going
corner.
to move it or...
Well, they have talked about taking it out,
mm-hmm.
and maybe they have, I'm not sure, but I don't think they have yet.
You might want to consider looking at that and moving it, or is it too big for the area?
Well, it's too big and it doesn't function well. It wouldn't be a good thing to have mm-hmm. there.
Okay. And so it's interesting that I've known you for a number of years, and I know you're not a Catholic, and yet I noticed that you went to, or you taught at U of D, which
Mhm.
is a Catholic school. And you taught what, comparative religions?
Well, I taught religious studies. It was an introductory course. And I did teach it as a world religions class.
Mhm. And these young people then, was it so that maybe they would think of going on in the Catholic faith, or?
I don't think so. I think it was that the University of Detroit is a university.
Right.
And they wanted their students to have a broad education
Mhm.
for their life.
And that's interesting that they had picked a person that wasn't a Catholic
Yes.
to teach this.
Yes, and they knew full well that I wasn't Catholic, but that was what they wanted.
Have you done anything further with that once you got out of the
No.
teaching? Mhm. Okay. And what do you plan this year as to further your ideas, etc.?
Well, I've just published a book last year.
What was the name of that?
That was called Lawn Wars, The Struggle for a New Lawn Ethic.
Oh,
And it's about native landscaping.
you're going to stop mowing?
Yes. But, I realize that that's a huge leap to ask people to make. So there are certainly many kinds of compromises that can be made.
Oh, that's great.
I mow my own lawn, parts of it.
I've got 20 acres and I have many wild animals there.
You asked what my next thing is.
Right.
One of them that is quite interesting is this new movement called Transition. And we would like to give a presentation on transition to the Historical Society.
Well, that'd be wonderful.
I believe my partner, Pam Bittner, in this thing has talked with Mary Alice Sealbinder, and she said we could come later in the spring to give a presentation. The idea centers around the notion of relocalizing our activities so that we don't have to depend on long supply chains for everything.
Okay.
Because, it's probably gas is going to get more and more expensive as it becomes harder and harder to find oil. And with the global warming situation, that's another thing that will put some pressure on being farther apart. And we just realized that right here in Ortonville, we have some wonderful resources.
I think we all agree there.
Yes.
What are some of these resources?
Well, right here, the old mill and the Historical Society, I think, is the greatest one. It's the people resources. It's the old skills of canning and weaving and those kinds of things that you people have managed to keep alive. And I think there's a renewed interest in those things. People want to do their own gardening. They would like to buy their produce closer to home.
And we do have that right in the village here.
We do.
However, I think the gardening there, I know in Detroit they're going to start to make areas available to the citizens
Yes.
to grow their own gardens. That should be different.
It's a big movement in Detroit.
Okay, and so this is called transitioning?
Transition, yes. It started out being called Transition Towns. It started in England and has I think it's only been going for 3 or 4 years, and it's just mushroomed all over the country. Pam and I started Transition Oakland County about a year ago.
Okay. What is Pam's last name?
Bittner.
Okay, good.
Pam lives in Brandon Township, and she's had a kitchen design business in Clarkston for many years. And now she's moved her business so that it's just this side of Oak Hill Road. So she's in Brandon. And what we'd like to do is to find people in other areas of the county that are willing to kind of carry that ball for their area, while we focus on the Ortonville area.
Okay. So you're hoping that your group expands into these other areas. I think that's very, very good. What are you doing to be able to get these people in the other areas interested?
Last year we had a booth at the Earth Day Expo in Rochester, and that was a good beginning for us on the county level. And we've met with the people at Oakland County Planning and Economic Development Services. They are aware of our activities and in fact have provided us with maps that show farming resources throughout the county.
And do you happen to have one of these? I'll see that it's posted here.
One of the maps?
Right.
There's one in process right now that will be printed probably by April or so.
Okay, now are you going to then have a garden that's going to be an exhibit type thing where people can come and look and say, gee, I'd like to do that? Or
well, we do have several examples right here in the township. One is not known to very many people, but it's a community-supported agriculture farm.
Okay.
And I don't know if you're aware of that term, but what that means is that it's farming on a subscription basis so that the customer shares the risk with the farmer. The customer buys a membership at the beginning of the growing season, so the farmer then has some capital to work with. And then as the crops come in, a member gets their share of the crops.
Now, does he
every week?
The member does the weeding, etc.
I'm not sure if this CSA is the shorthand way of talking about it. I don't know if this CSA has that option for members. Some do, some don't. But it's basically a paid membership. And the interesting thing about this one is that most of the members are from elsewhere. They're not from our area. They come in from Birmingham and Bloomfield Hills to get their produce.
I remember when I originally moved out here in '72, I thought, boy, I bought this 20 acres. I thought I'm going to have a garden. I always wanted one.
Yes.
And I made the mistake of making it 2 acres in size. And I thought I would never stop weeding. But the getting down and getting your hands in the soil,
yes.
Really, that was a nice thing. And if that's part of what you have in mind, I think that's an excellent
Well,
idea.
we want to encourage that. We're not going to be doing those things ourselves, except on our own property for our own use.
Yeah.
But what we would like to do is to discover all the resources that are here and make them known to each other. Because I think there's plenty here, right here. And but people don't know about them, like this CSA that I was just talking about.
No, that's good. And you're going to get out and you've been over and talked to the citizen, and
yes,
they're going to run a series of articles.
We're actually now in the process of running a film series in partnership with the library.
Oh,
every other week we have a feature film on one of the topics that's associated with.
Okay, who are you working with over at the library?
Barbara Falquist.
Oh, okay.
And Paula also. Gautier.
You know Ben in reference?
No, I don't think
He's a nice guy. He might be very interested in that, I guess. All right, so then when do you plan to kick things off?
We've been giving presentations to different groups. We've given a presentation to the Chamber of Commerce, to the Recreation Department, to St. Anne's Church. We've given 2 presentations there, and we'll be giving a 3rd one next month there to a larger group. And we're just trying to get in front of as many groups as we can
Well, that's very good.
in the area.
Well, very fun. You're going to get that kicked off. We're going to look forward to hearing from you and the successes you have. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Nice seeing you again, Lois.
Thank you.